Coming to you from beautiful Studio A here at Proven Winners Color Choice Shrubs. We're planting ideas in your head. It's the Gardening Simplified Show with Stacy Hervella, me, Rick Weist, and our engineer and producer, Adriana Robinson. You're going to give her a thank you.
I was so thrown by planting ideas in your head. I don't know if this is a good thing. It sounds vaguely menacing, so I'm a little, is this a good thing? I
think it's a good thing.
Okay, good.
And here we grow today. You know, having been in the retail garden center greenhouse industry for years, I was involved with studies that basically looked at people while they're shopping for plants. And what did they do? And what did they look at? And it was interesting in these studies that for a lot of people, what they wanted to do was touch the plants. Touch the plants. They call it the endowment effect. Oh. When you take a hold of something, you take ownership of it. But some plants are just so cute that you just want to pet them. You want to touch them. And what are those touchable plants? You know, in today's day and age too, you think about, like things that you can buy virtually and physically. Let's take books, for example. You can buy an ebook or you could buy the actual book. And I've never heard somebody say on a lousy weather day they wanted to curl up in the corner with a good ebook or iPad. No, you want to, you want that physical touch of the book. Now, some plants are just plain touchable. Chenille plant is one of the first plants that comes to mind for me. It's a great example. Chenille is an interesting plant, often used in hanging baskets, and it has exotic flowers that look like strands of chenille yarn. And you're going to tell us what chenille yarn is, right?
Well, so chenille is not a specific type of yarn. It's a technique where they take a yarn and they secure it to the fabric, and then they use a cutter to get that fluffiness. So it's not a specific, I mean, you can actually buy chenille yarn, but traditionally like a chenille bedspread was made by securing that yarn and then using a special cutter to make it fray and get all fluffy like that. But the great thing about chenille plant is it's red. So, yes. Most people think of chenille, they think of like a white bedspread or whatever. The chenille plant is bright red. I do love it. Now, I have to confess, when it is wet, it is not at its best.
That's true. That's true. Now, the French word for chenille is caterpillar, I believe. Oh. Caterpillar. But yes, it's soft and it's touchable, and chenille plant is one of those plants where in the greenhouse or the garden center, when it's hanging from the hanging baskets, you just stand there and watch people. They can't help themselves. They just walk up and they have to touch those chenille flowers. I thought they had named the plant after the captain in Chenille. You remember that?
As Chenille.
Chenille, that's right, in the mid-'70s. They had a big hit called Muskrat Love. Anyhow, I'm dating myself.
Wait, here. Adriana doesn't know Muskrat Love. You're going to have to listen to that after the show. Make it a plan.
All right. Well, scientists already know that plants are highly sensitive to touch of any kind, and they even have a word for this phenomenon. And boy, this is going to be a tough one to handle. It's thigmomorphogenesis. There we go. It doesn't flow off my tongue, but it's a word. And it's about how plants respond to touch. And in the wild, of course, it can happen via wind, raindrops, rubbing by passing animals, or other plant growth. Now, Stacy, we can't even begin to touch on all of the examples of plants that you want to touch. But some of the first ones that come to mind for me are moss. There's a lot of people who love moss. Stachy's, which is lamb's ear, is a very touchable plant. Scented geraniums, maidenhair fern or asparagus fern, ornamental grass inflorescence. There are a lot of plants that in the landscape you just want to touch.
Right. And I think, some of them are just like, I really want to see how that feels. But some of them are also like, wait, is that real? I kind of got to touch it and see if it's real. Sometimes if something's really shiny, you're not really sure. Or, the houseplant Moon Valley Pilea. Yes. That's one that I remember being like, that doesn't even look like it's real. Yes. And you kind of got African violets. Yes. Another one. I know my mom used to work with someone. She had African violets on her desk. And this woman would come and talk to her and she would stick her fingernails into The African violets. So my mom had to bring the African violets home. So they stood a chance.
See, that's what I mean. You just can't help it. I mean, you take a common example, your lawn. People love to walk barefoot on the lawn. That is, if you have a northern Kentucky bluegrass, probably not in the south with Bermuda grass.
No one wants to walk barefoot on my lawn, I can assure you.
Pig squeak, Virginia.
Oh, yeah. But that's one that people want to touch to see if it's real because it's so glossy, so thick and leathery that they're kind of like, wait, is that a fake plant or is that a real plant?
And it squeals like a pig as you rub the leaves. So it's a fabulous plant. Of course, herbs in general, succulents in general. I love Plectranthus. The cerveza and lime is so pretty. I saw a description the other day that said with the Plectranthus that all the foliage, that interesting foliage, stacks and layers like a Farrah Fawcett hairdo.
I could see that.
Isn't that interesting?
It's not quite so flowy, but it has the decumbent growth so that it's alternating and like layers in a
So you phrase it so much better than I do, but you're right, Stacy. And of course, Farrah Fawcett, again, dating myself from the mid-1970s, everybody had a poster of Farrah Fawcett, and I think it is the #1 selling poster ever in the history of selling posters.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's an amazing thing. Celosia plumes, allium blooms, hydrangea panicles, arborvitae, Douglas fir. At Christmas time, I can't help but stick my face right in the tree. It smells so good. It's so soft. It's so great. Now, there's a lot of them that we don't want to touch. And there's the obvious examples like hogweed or poison ivy or poison oak. But for me, what makes the hair stand up on the back of my neck? Hyacinth bulbs.
Oh, just the bulbs or the flowers?
The bulbs.
Really?
Oh, my word. Now, there are a lot of people who have this. Again, having worked in the garden center industry my whole life, you will get this itchy, irritating contact dermatitis from handling hyacinth bulbs.
Actually, that did happen to me. I thought you were just about you had a visceral reaction to thinking about them, but no, you're right. They do. I have had that happen, and it is very, very irritating.
Oh, it is miserable. And then, of course, prickly pear cactus,
don't want to touch
junipers, sumac, all of those types of plants. But there's one that drives me crazy, and that's stinging nettle.
Oh, my gosh, the worst.
Oh, the feeling that you get. Stinging nettles are covered with countless tiny hollow hairs. And when something brushes against their hairs, they're fragile, the tips break off, and the remainder of the hair then acts like a needle, and it pierces the skin, and it releases this histamine cocktail of venom that I got goosebumps, right? You see,
You do, yeah. I can't blame you. You know, I also, terrible situation. I feel like I have a very strong reaction to them. And if I get them on my finger will feel numb for 24 hours. Yeah. So it's not just that immediate, like, ouch. And, you know, when I was a young pup learning to garden and landscape, and I was working landscaping, no one had ever told me about stinging nettles. So I'm out there weeding these gardens. And then it's just like, what in the world just happened? And, you know, you do find eventually your way to identify them and look out for them. You know where they are growing. And you can actually pluck them if you get right at the base. But you just don't want to grab them, you know, because it's all over the underside of the leaf. It's those little hairs are everywhere. But you know what I've had a stinging nettle beer.
A stinging nettle beer.
Yes, in Czechoslovakia,
and I've had
the Czech Republic.
Prickly pear cactus wine.
Oh,
and it was very good.
Yeah. So there's a plus side, I guess, to all of these things.
So you were all right after that.
Yeah. Beer. No, it tasted very kind of green, but you know I had to try it because I feel like stinging nettle's an enemy, and you know I wanted to see how it went.
Well, stinging nettle. Now, of course, no relation to dead nettles, which are used in our landscapes, or lamium. Of course, that plant can get quite invasive, but used in hanging baskets or in tough areas like underneath shrubbery. So dead nettles are also used in that way. If you had to pick a #1 plant that you like to touch, Stacy, off the top of your, because I know for me it's lamb's ear. It's the steakies. I just love that.
Oh, you know, this is a tough one. But I remember when I was in horticulture school, I went to horticulture school at the New York Botanical Garden, so a huge collection of New World tropicals. And the curator of the conservatory showed me this specific ginger. And she said, whenever I'm stressed, I come over here and I feel the underside of this ginger. So on top, it looked like just like a normal ginger. But on the underside, it was just like flannel silk. It was like thick and silky, and I've never forgotten that. I don't recall which species it was. I could find out, but that was definitely a very memorable plant touching moment for me.
That's a great story. So there you have it, touching plants. And in future shows, we'll talk about the sensory aspects of plants. There are many, and part of the reason we enjoy them so in our landscapes. Coming up next, plants on trial here on the Gardening Simplified Show.
Greetings, gardening friends, and welcome back to the Gardening Simplified Show. We're going to put a plant on trial. Of course, it is a touchable plant, but I did want to conclude our discussion of things that you touch in the garden center. Do you know about the internet's joke of slapping bales of potting soil?
No.
So you know
Please tell me.
how the internet gets a bunch of people together and people start to like share experiences, and then they're like, whoa, I never knew you wanted to do that. So there's a number of Facebook groups where it's kind of like a running joke that when you're in the garden center or, you know, box store, that you walk by those stacked up flat bales of potting mix and you just got to slap them.
Wow. Sounds almost dirty.
No, it's just like, you know, they're so like, they're just there. And it's a meme. It is, slapping potting mix is a meme. So
I could see that.
Yeah.
I could see that. You know, I've stacked a lot of bags in my life, and then when you set them on the pallet, and the last one, you give it a smack.
You give it a smack. See, you've done it.
You're right. Never crossed my mind. I love it. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Well, I'm glad I'm in good company because I was a little worried at the beginning of that conversation.
Oh my.
But on to plants on trial. And, you know, I was looking at our selection of Proven Winners Color Choice shrubs. We have around 325 of them. And there really isn't anything that's like super soft. You know, we're talking about like steakies, lamb's ears, things that are very, very soft. You know, potentilla can be quite silky and have some hairs. But I realized that my like touching compulsion when it comes to plants, especially around here at the nursery, is a full bloom mophead hydrangea. You know, when you get that big rounded bloom, you just kind of got to like bounce your hand on it. And it's kind of a seeing if it's real situation, but also you just like have to like experience it in that way. But we've done a big leaf macrophylla hydrangea recently. So I am bringing up another plant, another hydrangea with a touchable bloom, and that is Little Lime Punch hydrangea.
That plant is so beautiful because when we did our summer tour through the Proven Winners garden, that plant really stood out to me.
Yeah, it's very distinctive. So it's a panicle hydrangea, and you might your ears might have perked up at the idea of little lime. So a lot of people know little lime. It was the dwarf limelight that we introduced a couple of years ago, and Little Lime Punch is similar. But it does obviously have some differences. So it's similarly small, 3 to 5 feet tall and wide. And the flowers start out white and then turn green. And then they age to this melange or this mixture of reds and pinks and white. And it's really just extraordinary. But where the touchability comes in is that the inflorescences or flowers of Little Lime Punch hydrangea are so densely packed. The florets that make up that inflorescence are extremely densely packed within that bloom. And so it kind of has that same, like you just have to really touch it. And when you do, you will not believe how solid it is. It really is very, very packed. And you can even see that, you know, when you see the plant, you can tell that its blooms they don't have as much space in them. It's really, really dense. It also has very, very sturdy stems. So between this dense bloom and these very sturdy stems, you know, you can kind of give that a little whack and see what happens.
And see what happens. You had me at melange. Did you say melange?
I said melange, yeah.
Melange.
Melange.
Oh, that's nice.
It's like a mixture.
I love it.
Okay.
It's beautiful.
It is a melange of colors, and that is one of the reasons that we selected it is, you know, it's important to us at Proven Winners Color Choice Shrubs when we select panicle hydrangeas Then we are selecting for strong stems because older varieties don't necessarily have that. And this color development of the flowers. And I think it's safe to say that Little Lime Punch is really one of the most extraordinary varieties for that fall color development because it does go through so many changes. A lot of them, like Quickfire, one of my favorites, will go from basically white to red. You know, some will kind of go pink to a little bit burgundy, whereas Little Lime Punch, it just has a bunch of different colors on it all at once. And it's really quite extraordinary. And the pictures really speak for themselves. And of course, if you want to see the pictures, you can go to gardeningsimplifiedonair.com and see that and learn more and link out to more information about Little Lime Punch. But, you know, this plant is still relatively new. I think this was really its first year in garden centers. So people are just starting to get to know this plant and learn a little bit more about it. But when they see that picture, it really does sell itself. And I wanted to talk about it today because, you know, in the same way that it has these unique characteristics of having this very dense bloom, nice compact size, really amazing color. Those qualities do combine to make it a little bit different to grow than most panicle hydrangeas. Now, it's certainly not more difficult. It's very easy to grow. It's hardy from USDA Zone 3 to USDA Zone 8, so just like all of the other panicle hydrangeas. But there is something about its composition and the way it grows to have that density. It is more slowly growing than a lot of other panicle hydrangeas. Okay. And, you know, it's easy, I think, for people to say, okay, well, I've grown a panicle hydrangea before. I know what to expect, and not really consider that there are, you know, varying genetics between all of these different varieties. And so there are some slightly different things to understand and know what to expect as you're growing something like Little Lime Punch. So it is slower growing and slower to get established. And I think that's really crucial because what we have seen, and I have certainly witnessed here, you know, observing the plant over the last 5 years or so in our trial gardens, it takes a little bit longer to flower. Most panicle hydrangeas will flower in their first year. Little Lime Punch might not. It might if you get it, you know, established and get that good root system developed so it can put the energy into growing. And another thing that I have certainly observed here is that it won't develop its best color until it's similarly established. And that might sound strange at first, but really when you think about it, you know, a plant, those colorful pigments that, you know, we love, from a plant perspective, that's kind of a luxury item. Mm-hmm. If it has the energy to produce those pigments, it will. But if it doesn't, it's not going to. And it's going to take to be able to develop those resources, a good, fully developed root system. So until you have that, you're not going to be seeing optimal performance. So, you know, we're definitely hearing from people who are like, hey, I bought Little Lime Punch. It's done great, but it's not doing this yet. And so I have definitely seen it firsthand. This is a sleep, creep, leap plant, which is something we've talked about before. First year sleep, second year creep, you're going to see some growth. And then in that third year and beyond, you know, assuming, of course, that it's in the right conditions, that's when you're really going to see it start to shine and do its thing. And I think, you know, that can be a little bit frustrating for people. But I think that's also sort of the reward of gardening, is sticking with something, watching it mature, and going on that journey, you know, with that plant.
Yeah, maintaining your composture, you know, hanging in there with it. You know, with this plant, Stacy, it's that multicolor effect that I just love. That just really caught my eye. And when we were in the trial garden, I mentioned to you that it made me think of shaved ice, or those snow cones you get at festivals or at carnivals. And by the way, I was going to mention to you that that whole shaved ice thing, as I understand it, started in Japan, and they would use natural ice with cooked red beans or mung beans with sugar and milk. But in Puerto Rico, they have something they call a piragua, which is pyramid plus water. So they have these pointy types of snow cones, which look very much like a panicled hydrangea. So must be that's why it made me feel that way. But I love that. That's how my brain works. But I love that multicolor effect. I just love it.
And you know, that is something that's very different about Little Lime Punch. And one of the reason for that, the reason it is able to have these blooms at different stage on the plant at once, is because once it has that energy built up and can put it in there, it does keep putting out those new flowers. So since it's not setting all of its flower buds and blooming at once, you get some that flowered earlier and are going to be taking on color earlier, and some that are really just starting to come out now. And that's how you get that amazing multicolor effect.
Yeah. So with the snow cones, they used colored syrup.
Right.
But with this hydrangea, it's because the flowers are emerging at different times.
Stages, just naturally. It's just one of the many unique qualities of this plant. And I think, again, people sort of create these expectations. Hey, I've grown limelight. I know what to expect from this. And it's always interesting that plants, even when we think we're really familiar with them, can actually keep us guessing. Yeah. I like that, actually.
I do too.
I don't find that frustrating. But there's a lot more to say about Little Lime Punch. Overall, its care is going to be just like any other panicle hydrangea. Here you can take full sun in cool climates, part sun in warmer areas to shade. Well-drained soil, mulch is always a good idea. All of the instructions for growing this will be on our website, gardeningsimplifiedonair.com, along with all those fabulous pictures of this wonderful hydrangea from Proven Winners Color Choice Shrubs that you can get at your garden center right this very minute. And while you're there, who knows what else you will find that you want to touch. We're going to take a little break. When we come back, we've got the garden mailbag to open up, so please stay tuned. Greetings, gardening friends, and welcome back to the Gardening Simplified show. We do try to simplify gardening, even though we get a little goofy with it and throw in big words like thigmomorphogenesis,
yes,
which does not seem simple, but it's about the simple joy of touching plants. And one of the things we do to try to simplify gardening for you is to answer your gardening questions. And, it's been interesting because when we started the show about a year ago, it was fall, people didn't really have a lot of questions. And so now we have a lot of questions, and they are important to us. Some of them are easier to answer on air than others. So I just want to encourage you, if we don't get to your question, you can visit the Proven Winners website, provenwinners.com, and click feedback and ask us questions there. We don't want anybody waiting, on important gardening decisions. So if we don't get to your question, it's not that we don't think it's important. It's just that we have limited time. Yeah. And, that's a shame because I do love helping people garden. But if you do have a question and you want to ask us, you can send that to help, HELP, at gardeningsimplifiedonair.com, or just visit our website, and there's a contact form there. You can even include a photo if you want, which photos are always helpful. I don't know how people helped others garden before digital photography. So what do we got in the mailbag this week, Rick?
All right, Kate's writing to us this week. Hey, Rick and Stacy, I love your show. I also love hydrangeas, and I'm curious to learn more about them. Which Proven Winner hydrangeas bloom earliest in the season? My Firelight Tidbits started flowering in late June, but I've seen other hydrangeas in my St. Louis metropolitan area blooming as early as May. Is there a document with bloom time information somewhere?
And the answer to that is yes, there is a document. And the way that we have that, and I will, of course, post that in the show notes at gardeningsimplifiedonair.com. But the exact week that a hydrangea will bloom is going to vary depending on your climate. So the way that chart is organized is that we have basically early seasons, so the one that you can expect to flower earliest, which of course is the Quickfire series, all the way to the ones that you can expect to flower latest, which is more like Pinky Winky. Those tend to flower later in the season. So the exact week that's going to happen is going to be different in St. Louis than here in West Michigan, and the same is true for wherever you're growing it. So we can't tell you a precise month because it will depend on the heat, but we will show you that. Now, again, the earliest blooming panicle hydrangea is definitely Quickfire.
Yes.
And that was where the name came from, because it's quick to bloom, and remains one of my absolute favorites. But to address what you said about hydrangeas blooming in May, I have to confess, Kate, I don't think you're actually seeing hydrangeas. I think that you are almost certainly seeing viburnum. You would have to be in a very warm climate, indeed, warmer than St. Louis, to have actual hydrangeas blooming in May. But there are a number of viburnums, like double file viburnum, snowball viburnum. What are some of the other names?
Yeah, so you've got the plicatum, the caryophyllum viburnums. There are a number of viburnums. And working in the garden center or greenhouse, Stacy, I get that call during the month of May into June a lot. People will call and say, do you have any snowball bushes? And you always question, well, what are we talking about? You know, are we talking about the smooth arborescens, hydrangeas, or viburnums? So when you use a generalization like that, it can be kind of confusing.
Right. And, you know, the snowball viburnums or double file viburnums, they do look so much like hydrangeas. In fact, they can even be mop head or lace cap, just like a hydrangea. They have opposite foliage, so the leaves are positioned opposite one another on the stem. So one could not be blamed for thinking that a viburnum is a hydrangea. Now, one brief exception to that is our new Fairy Trail Bride hydrangea, because those are very, very early blooming. Those are probably bloom in May, but they have bigger, glossier foliage, leathery foliage that you are going to want to touch. And then, so that kind of gives you some sense. Max or big leaf hydrangeas in your climate are probably going to bloom more like early July. And I have found that typically arborescens or the smooth hydrangea, things like Incredible, usually are also in bloom by the end of June. So you can really, if you know, I'll put those comparison charts on our website. But with careful planning and some careful plant selection, you really could have hydrangeas in bloom, you know, essentially from like roughly mid-June all the way up to the first frost. You just have to pick the right ones and mix them in the right way, and then you get that like amazing display.
Fantastic. Yeah, when I was on Cape Cod this summer, the smooth arborescens snowball flowers were in bloom early July. So I would guess, yes, St. Louis probably pretty similar.
Yeah, you know, we've had them here bloom as early as like that last week of July. Sometimes going even into the first or second week of July. It really just depends on how warm your spring is.
Sure. All right. Oh, by the way, I got some questions, too, from some of our listeners and viewers who asked me where I got my Mr. Rogers sweater.
Do you remember? I know you've said you've had it for a long time.
Oh, I've had it like 30 or 40 years, but I remember well. It was my personal tailor that got me that sweater, J.C. Penney.
Ah.
Yeah. So that's where I got it. I don't know if you can get them anymore, and I'm not sharing mine.
And I'm not sure that J.C. Penney is still around. So.
I think they are.
Okay, good.
I think they are. Nikki writes to us, I've gotten lucky enough to make it this far into the season without the rabbits bothering my impatience. But now they've discovered them, and they are munching away. I read that hot pepper spray can be sprayed on plants to repel rabbits and other munchers like deer. Curious if you guys have any experience or luck with hot pepper spray.
So what do you think?
I think yes. I have used it. I've had experience with it in the garden center. When it comes to rabbits, you got to think like a rabbit. Rabbits are timid. So you want to create an environment that kind of scares them. Rabbits think of two things. They're scared and they want to multiply. So whatever you can do, and pepper sprays, the capsaicin in those pepper sprays, is irritating to them. So, and generally the rabbits go after tender foliage. Mm-hmm. Once that foliage is hardened off, they tend to go find something else. But when those plants are first coming up,
yeah, impatience especially. Yeah. Now, Rick, you reminded me of something that we should mention. This hot pepper spray is not like the hot pepper spray you carry in your purse to ward off offenders. You don't want to use that.
It's specially formulated for the garden center industry and for this purpose. But I always say pepper late than sorry, or something like that.
It is a good effective repellent. And I would have to say that not all deer repellents are necessarily going to be effective on rabbits. And they're also very often much more expensive than something that will work for rabbits. So if you don't need to worry about deer, a hot pepper spray is a good idea. There are probably recipes online to make it home. Whether or not they work, I couldn't say, because what you're really,
mess with it.
I wouldn't mess with it either, because what you're really going to want is those adjuvants or things that they add to make it stick, so it doesn't just run off. And you're right, Rick, when things harden off, they're less appealing to rabbits, but I don't know if that ever really happens with impatiens. So
that's true. These commercially bought pepper sprays generally have some kind of wax in them.
Right.
Is what they
and
have.
Sometimes they even say hot pepper wax on them, on the package.
So then they're
they're effective. They should be inexpensive. You just have to keep up on them, because every time the plant starts to grow, that new growth comes out, and once again, could be appealing to rabbits.
I'm not going to do any more rabbit puns. They're just not bunny anymore.
We'll take a pause.
I want to quickly mention before we move to the next question, a smooze, SME, USE. That's that small little area under a hedge where the rabbit runs and the dog chases it. And you got to look for those smooth areas in your landscape that they're using as a habitual trail. Try to close that off too.
That could help.
Yeah. So, all right. Kelly's wondering, I like to make sure my boxwoods are tightly pruned throughout the year. Want to make sure I'm not doing it so that they can get winter burn or sunburn. Can you let me know the guidelines of what's best? Thanks so much. I really love all the information from your show.
So, Kelly, I'm really glad that you asked this because I think that the answer to this lies in something that doesn't really get mentioned enough. And that is that after you do trimming of something like a boxwood, and it's especially if you've done it and it's quite tight, you got to water. The reason that you start to see that browning after trimming is usually because all those wounds are giving off so much water vapor. So, you think about the plant was just kind of a closed system. You make all these cuts, you make cuts to leaves, and you've just opened up a ton of surface area for the plant to lose water from. And the plant can withstand that, but particularly like in spring and summer when it's starting to get warm, it can be very sunny. And if you don't have the plants on irrigation, they can really start to show that browning. So I think the first answer, Kelly, is definitely to make sure that after you've done a trimming that you're watching them for moisture over the following weeks as they recover from that wounding. And definitely do not go too far into fall, late summer, fall.
Agreed.
Because, first of all, you don't want to push any new growth. And when you trim something, that tends to push new growth.
Exactly.
That new growth is just going to get damaged by cold. So I would say in terms of the end of the season, the end of the growing season, you're really going to want to have your last trimming done probably like late July, early August, I would think, in a cold climate.
100%. Let it harden off. And like you said, Stacy, some mulch and water at the base going into winter.
All right, there you have it. Thank you so much all for your questions. You can get all of our answers recapped at gardeningsimplifiedonair.com. We're going to come back with branching news in just a moment.
Welcome back to the Gardening Simplified Show. It's time for branching news. Not breaking news, but we don't make this stuff up. Stacy, I've been following closely. You know that I went to the Netherlands this past spring to look at the tulips, all the plants flowering. And boy, if there's anyone that can handle water, it's the Dutch. Well, I should know, too. My parents are both from the Netherlands, but they've had a wetter than normal spring, and then summer has been the same. The month of July, it rained nearly every day last month.
Oh, my goodness.
In the Netherlands. Now, the point here is that it does affect the bulb suppliers. Of course, many people get their bulbs that they're going to be planting at this time of the year from the Netherlands. You'll have bulbs, but it sure does make it tougher. There may be some shortages. Maybe some of the bulbs won't be as big as they normally would because our friends over there have just been fighting the weather this year. So it's kind of interesting to think about.
It is interesting, and I think a lot of people might be surprised that rain would have a negative impact on bulbs because they think, oh, well, hey, a bunch more water, that means everything's going to be growing gangbusters. But that's not the case at all. In fact, the areas where most of these flower bulbs are native is sort of in the like Central Europe, or like the Caucasus,
Mm-hmm.
And they have very, very hot, dry summers, and so these bulbs thrive most ideally in scenarios where they're bone dry in the summer. And this is why, like, if you plant tulip bulbs in your perennial gardens, a lot of times they don't perennialize because they rot because you're watering your perennial garden all the time. Whereas if you have some, off somewhere and they don't get any care, they can tend to perennialize. So summer moisture is like the biggest enemy of a bulb that I can think of after perhaps a squirrel.
Yeah, and you're right. And, we talk on the show a lot about areas that are affected by drought. Mm-hmm. Here we have one that's the exact opposite. So in the summertime, when you're vacationing in July, having rain every day.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing to think of. All right, 2 in 3 Americans, 67%, said they could live on sandwiches alone for a full week, according to new research. Goes to prove you it's never past your bread time to have a sandwich. What makes the perfect sandwich the perfect sandwich, according to a survey of 2,000 Americans? And we're going to put this study at gardeningsimplifiedonair.com. You can check it out yourself. Consists of tomato, cheddar cheese, and Black Forest ham. That is the most popular sandwich that people can eat. No bologna here. All right? And the top 5 fruits and vegetables people would prefer in a perfect sandwich, number 1 is tomato and onion, followed by cucumber, lettuce, and pickles. Now, that's interesting to me because I would have had pickles at the top of the list. Not necessarily cucumbers. I can see tomato and onion, but those are the big 5: tomato, onion, cucumber, lettuce, and pickles.
Well, lettuce I can see. You know, tomatoes kind of surprise me because, yes, a sandwich with tomato is excellent if the tomato is good. But, you know, the span of time where we have sandwich-worthy tomatoes in the U.S. is relatively small. And what's the good of a crummy, flavorless, yucky
Pale
tomato?
and rubbery, yes.
Not, that's, you know. But I guess people are just assuming, in an ideal world, assuming all ingredients are at their top quality. Then I could see it.
I love it. Well, let us move on. Scientist turns plants into photos by making prints directly onto leaves. Now, we're going to have to ask Adriana about this, and you, if you've ever seen this, but we're going to put the story on the website, but it's a story that's developing, so to speak. A popular way to make chlorophyll prints is to expose an existing image onto a leaf, treating the leaf itself like photographic paper. Once the leaf has been exposed, it must be developed. The two-step process begins with an 8-minute boiling alcohol bath to remove the chlorophyll from the leaf, and then finally an iodine bath exposes the starch granules hidden beneath the leaf's surface. So these granules are organized according to whatever a person used to control how sunlight fell on the leaf. My head's spinning. But goodness, that's amazing to me.
It was pretty interesting. I did look at it. Now the leaf was green, so I'm not really sure how that works. If they stripped out all, I didn't like look at the whole video. So it was interesting. I wonder how long they last, because that seems like a lot of work for something that's not going to last very long.
So I think we're going to let Adriana look at that, and then we're going to get an opinion from her on this, because if anybody could do a great job of it, it would be Adriana. And I'm just fascinated by this. So it looks a little too complicated for me, but anyhow, so we'll share that with you so you have that information. How about a natural balance? Even before the havoc of the storms this past spring in California, San Francisco already had one of the sparsest tree canopies of any major U.S. city, and it's shrinking. Trees have not been planted to keep up with the rate of removal. Now, this was interesting. The Department of Public Works assumes an annual 4% street tree mortality rate.
I would have actually thought it might be higher.
Yeah.
That kind of surprises me.
4%. But the spring storms, they had those atmospheric rivers, they called them, created all kinds of problems. And now there's all kinds of tension because people are suing because a tree fell on their car or they were injured or whatever it may be. And so they say it's a no-brainer that in the right-of-way with those trees, the city is liable. And they already have the sparsest population of trees in the country. So a fascinating story to watch develop.
Yeah, that's really a shame because you could grow some really cool trees in San Francisco.
Yeah.
But I guess the 4% mortality rate does make sense after I thought about it a little more. They don't have a cold winter, so they don't have to worry about like a lot of cold damage or damage from snowplows and, all the snowplow wake and everything. So that's not surprising. But have you ever been to the Stribing Arboretum in San Francisco?
I have not.
Oh my gosh, one of the most extraordinary places you'll ever see. The plants there, it's heavenly. It's just gorgeous. And it's right there in the middle of the city.
And what did you call it?
The Stribing Arboretum.
The Stribing Arboretum?
Yeah, it's in Golden Gate Park.
Okay. All right. I got to check that out. I have not been there. Instead of leaving your heart in San Francisco, you may be leafing your heart in San Francisco.
Probably will.
Yeah, I probably will. I worked on that one for a while. All right, Romulus, Michigan, right here in Michigan. Police in one Michigan town had anything but an ordinary day when a woman called them to report she discovered an alligator on the back porch of her Romulus home. She called the police station and calmly told the sergeant, "I have a crocodile on my back patio." There was laughter in the background. The police officer said, "Can you send me a picture?" So she snapped a picture and sent it. The police officer said, "Well, I'll be." And sure enough, there was an alligator on her back porch. So something you see in Florida, but not necessarily here in Michigan often. So
is this one of those, urban legends of the people flushing the little baby alligators down the toilet and they lived in the sewer and they got huge?
Oh, and they live a long time.
Oh,
alligators live for a long, long time.
Well, they're practically dinosaurs.
That's why there's a high chance you'll see one later.
Oh, yeah.
Alligator.
I had a feeling that was coming.
All right, we'll share that story with you too. And then finally, with the start of the football season upon us, this story, a Las Vegas home is for sale, 50 years and nearly 2,000 collegiate football helmets later. The priceless collection has outgrown the 6,000 square foot abode. So the house is full of college football helmets. And if you want to buy it, you get the helmets.
Oh, wonderful. I guess.
Well, that's my point exactly. I'm not so sure that, you've very much limited your market in selling your home. Now, of course, realtors say plan to take your furniture, art hanging on the walls, small throw rugs, your hanging plants, your beds, your curtains, etc. Exterior items like patio umbrellas should be taken with you, but don't take stuff that's attached or planted in the ground or whatever. You're going to have to negotiate those things, and you can't pull them out of the ground. So if you're into football and you want a football helmet, we're going to post that story at gardeningsimplifiedonair.com, and maybe you can bid for the house.
All right. I'll be curious to see the landscaping. Let me put it that way.
Me too. Stacy, always a privilege and pleasure to do this show with
Likewise.
you. And Adriana Robinson, can't thank you enough for all you do for the Gardening Simplified show. And thanks to you who watch on YouTube, listen to our podcast, listen to us on radio. Thank you very much. Have yourself a great week.